In a Chicago courtroom, a judge is ready to sentence 17-year-old Aiden Marshall for theft, but the boy suddenly tears the case apart like a 20-year lawyer. A black teenager against a system where prejudice outweighs evidence. Every step he takes is an explosion that exposes the lies. Will he overcome injustice or become another victim? The air in the Cook County Courthouse in Chicago hung heavy, thick with the weight of anticipation and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Rows of spectators lined the gallery, their whispers buzzing like static as they craned their necks to catch a glimpse of the drama unfolding below. At the defendant's table stood Aiden Marshall, a lanky 17-year-old with dark skin and a quiet defiance etched into his posture. His hands rested casually in the pockets of his worn jeans, but his sharp brown eyes scanned the room with a precision that didn't match his age. Accused of stealing a sleek BMW X5 and resisting arrest, he looked out of place, like a kid drowning in a sea of suits and gavels. But Aiden wasn't drowning. Not yet. Judge Edward Clayton presided over the courtroom, his silver hair gleaming under the lights, his face carved with the kind of weariness that comes from decades of seeing the same stories play out. He leaned back in his high-backed chair, peering down at Aiden over the edge of his bifocals, his lips curling into a faint, dismissive smirk. Grand Theft Auto, resisting arrest, he drawled, his voice dripping with dry amusement. You must think you're some kind of big shot, huh, son? This isn't a game. This is my courtroom. A ripple of chuckles spread through the room. The bailiff, the stenographer, even a few jurors couldn't hold back their amusement. To them, Aiden was just another troubled kid from the South Side, caught in a cycle they'd seen 100 times before. But Aiden didn't flinch. He didn't laugh. He'd spent years preparing for a moment like this. Not this exact one. Not as a defendant, but he knew the courtroom better than most lawyers twice his age. While other teens scrolled TikTok or shot hoops, Aiden pored over legal texts his mother, Tanya Marshall, brought home from her job as a court clerk. She'd spent 15 years typing up case files, watching judges and prosecutors twist the system to fit their narratives. Over dinner, she'd vent about sloppy police work, biased rulings, and defendants who never stood a chance. Aiden listened. He absorbed. By 13, he could spot a loophole in a case faster than his teachers could grade a test. Now, at 17, he was about to turn that knowledge into a weapon. Judge Clayton sighed, flipping open the case file with a lazy flick of his wrist. Let's keep this short. I got a lunch meeting at noon. Another chuckle from the gallery. The prosecutor, Victor Hensley, rose from his seat with the smug confidence of a man who'd already won. His navy suit was pressed to perfection, his tie a crisp nod of authority. Your Honor, he began, his voice smooth and practiced. The state will prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Aiden Marshall stole a 2023 BMW X5, reported missing from a Lincoln Park driveway. Officers chased him through the streets of Chicago, where he fled, only to be caught with his hands still warm from the wheel. The words landed like a gavel, heavy and final. The gallery shifted, murmurs growing louder. On paper, it was a slam dunk, a stolen car, a chase, and arrest. Judge Clayton nodded, barely glancing up from the file. Sound clear enough. Defense? He turned to Aiden's public defender, a frazzled woman named Karen Phelps, who'd barely spoken since the hearing began. She stood, clutching a thin folder, her voice shaky. Your Honor, my client. Aiden placed a hand on her arm, a silent signal. She froze, then sank back in her chair, her eyes wide. For the first time, Aiden spoke, his voice steady and low, cutting through the room like a blade. I'll be representing myself, Your Honor. The courtroom went still, dead silent. Judge Clayton blinked, then let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. You'll what? Hensley smirked, crossing his arms as if this were a bad joke. The bailiff raised an eyebrow, and the gallery erupted into a low hum of disbelief. But Aiden didn't waver. He stepped forward, his sneakers scuffing the polished floor, and repeated himself, louder this time. I'll be defending myself. Clayton leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand, amusement flickering in his gray eyes. This isn't a school project, kid. You're facing real charges, felonies. You sure you want to play lawyer? The gallery snickered again, but Aiden's expression didn't crack. He'd seen this before in his mother's stories. Judges who underestimated, prosecutors who overreached. He knew the game, and he was ready to flip the board. "Your Honor," Aiden said, his tone calm but firm, "before we go any further, I'd like to ask the prosecution a question." Hensley raised an eyebrow, gesturing with mock generosity. "Go ahead, kid. Entertain us." Aiden took a slow breath, then locked eyes with the prosecutor. "You said officers chased me through the streets and caught me in the car, right? That's what your report says." Hensley nodded, impatience creeping into his voice. "That's correct. Officer Paul Kendrick saw you behind the wheel, fleeing the scene. It's all in his statement." Aiden tilted his head, just slightly, a faint glimmer of something, strategy, flashing in his eyes. "Then I'm moved to challenge that statement. Your Honor," he said, turning to Clayton. "Officer Kendrick wasn't even on duty when this supposed chase started." A murmur swept through the courtroom like wildfire. Hensley's smirk faltered just for a split second. Clayton frowned, leaning forward. "On what grounds?" Aiden straightened, pulling his hands from his pockets for the first time. "On the grounds that his report's a lie. If the court checks his GPS logs from that night, you'll see he wasn't anywhere near Lincoln Park when the car was taken. I've got a feeling he didn't see me at all." The gallery buzzed louder now, heads turning, whispers sharpening into questions. Hensley cleared his throat, his polished veneer cracking. "Your Honor, this is absurd. Are we really entertaining a defendant's word over a sworn officer's?" But Clayton didn't laugh this time. He studied Aiden, then shifted his gaze to Hensley. "Counselor, you got a problem with pulling those logs?" Hensley hesitated, a pause too long, a crack too wide. The jury noticed, the gallery noticed, and Aiden? He stood there, hands back in his pockets, letting the silence do the work. The judge rubbed his temple, exhaling. "Get the logs. Now." For the first time, the courtroom wasn't laughing. And Aiden Marshall, the kid they'd written off, had just thrown his first punch. The Cook County Courthouse felt like a pressure cooker ready to blow. The gallery hummed with restless energy as Judge Edward Clayton's order hung in the air. "Get the logs." Prosecutor Victor Hensley adjusted his tie, his polished exterior fraying at the edges as he scrambled to regain control. Aiden Marshall stood at the defendant's table, his 17-year-old frame steady, his sharp eyes tracking every move. The room wasn't laughing anymore. His challenge to Officer Kendrick's statement had flipped the script, and now the system was squirming. A clerk scurried out to retrieve the GPS data, and Judge Clayton tapped his gavel lightly, silencing the growing whispers. "While we wait," Hensley said, forcing a tight smile, "let's not lose sight of the facts. The defendant's prints were on the BMW's door handle. He was arrested 2 blocks from where the car was ditched. This isn't a coincidence, Your Honor." His voice carried that rehearsed weight again, but it didn't land quite as hard this time. The jury shifted in their seats, some scribbling notes, others glancing at Aiden. Aiden didn't blink. "Prints on a door don't mean I stole it," he said, his tone even but cutting. He turned to the jury, locking eyes with a middle-aged woman in the front row. "You ever touch a car in a parking lot? Lean on it, check if it's locked? Doesn't mean you drove off with it." The woman's brow furrowed, and a murmur rippled through the gallery. Hensley opened his mouth to object, but Aiden kept going. "I was at a bodega that night with friends. We walked past the BMW. I touched it. Dumb move, sure, but I didn't take it." Clayton raised an eyebrow. "You expect us to believe that, son?" Aiden nodded. "Yeah, because it's true. And the GPS logs will show Kendrick wasn't there to see me, or anyone, drive off." Hensley smirked, flipping through his notes. "Nice story, kid, but we've got more. Your Honor, the state submits Exhibit C, security footage from a gas station near the chase. It shows the defendant running from the scene." The gallery gasped. A projector flickered to life, casting grainy footage onto a screen. There was Aiden, or someone who looked like him, sprinting down an alley, hood up, head low. The room tilted, the air thickening with doubt. Even Karen Phelps, the public defender, shot Aiden a worried glance. Judge Clayton leaned forward, squinting at the screen. "That you, Mr. Marshall?" Aiden's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. "No, Your Honor." "Play it again, slower." Hensley scoffed, but Clayton waved a hand. Humor him. The clerk rewound the tape, frame by frame. Aiden stepped closer, pointing at the screen. There. See that shadow? Second person, right behind. The camera cuts off before you see them. Why's that? The jury leaned in, eyes narrowing. Sure enough, a faint silhouette flickered, just for a second, before the footage jumped. Hensley's smirk vanished. This is speculation, Your Honor. Aiden cut in. It's not. Someone else was there. Someone the police didn't chase. And I'll tell you why. They didn't want to. The gallery buzzed louder, heads whipping toward Hensley. Judge Clayton rubbed his chin. You saying the footage is tampered with? Aiden shrugged, casual but deliberate. I'm saying it's convenient. Like Kendrick's report. The clerk returned, handing a printout to the judge. Clayton scanned it, his face hardening. Officer Kendrick's GPS, he said slowly, puts him at a diner 3 miles from Lincoln Park when the theft was reported. A collective inhale swept the room. Hensley's jaw clenched. That doesn't change the prints. The video. Clayton held up a hand. It changes enough. Sit down, counselor. Aiden exhaled quietly, his mind racing. The logs were a win, but that video was a curveball. He'd seen his mother's case files, cases where evidence was found to fit a narrative. He knew what was coming next. They'd double down, twist harder. And he knew why. The real thief, the one who'd slipped away, wasn't some random kid from the South Side. Aiden had a hunch, a name he'd overheard at the bodega that night, a rich kid from Lincoln Park with a dad who golfed with cops. But proving it? That was the fight ahead. The judge's voice broke his thoughts. We'll recess for an hour. Give me that full tape, unedited. The gavel cracked, and the room erupted. Reporters scribbling, jurors whispering. Aiden stayed still, letting the chaos swirl. Hensley glared at him, but Aiden met his eyes, unflinching. The first twist was his. The next one would be bigger. The Cook County Courthouse buzzed like a hive as the recess ended. Spectators shuffled back into the gallery, their whispers sharp with speculation after Aiden Marshall's bombshell about Officer Kendrick's GPS logs. The 17-year-old stood at the defendant's table, his hoodie swapped for a borrowed button-up from his mom, Tanya, who sat in the front row, her hands clasped tight. Judge Edward Clayton settled into his chair, his stern gaze sweeping the room. Let's see that full tape, he said, his voice edged with impatience. Prosecutor Victor Hensley stood, his confidence dented but not broken. Your Honor, the state has the unedited gas station footage. It still shows the defendant fleeing. The projector whirred again, and the grainy video replayed, slower this time. Aiden's figure darted through the alley, hood up, but now the shadow Aiden had pointed out lingered longer. A second person, taller, trailing just behind before the feed cut. The jury leaned forward, eyes narrowing. A man in the back row muttered, "Who's that?" Aiden seized the moment. Your Honor, that's not me running. I wasn't even near that alley. I was 2 blocks away, walking home. And that shadow? That's the real thief. The police didn't chase him. Hensley scoffed, his voice rising. This is fantasy, Your Honor. He's spinning a story to dodge the evidence, his prints, his presence near the car. But Aiden didn't back down. He turned to the jury, his tone steady, deliberate. Why the tape cut? Why they ignore that second guy? I'll tell you why. He didn't fit their profile. The gallery stirred, a low rumble of unease spreading. Judge Clayton frowned. Profile. Aiden nodded, stepping forward. Yeah, I heard a name that night at the bodega, Tyler Grayson. White kid, lives up in Lincoln Park. His dad's a big-shot lawyer, plays poker with half the precinct. I saw him near that BMW, bragging about borrowing it. But when the cops showed up, they grabbed me instead. Guess I look more like their guy. A gasp rippled through the room. Hensley's face flushed red. Your Honor, this is slander. He's accusing an innocent citizen with no proof. Clayton's eyes narrowed, flicking to Aiden. You got evidence for that, son? Aiden took a breath, his heart pounding, but his voice calm. Not yet. But check the bodega's security cam. Inside, not outside. Tyler was there, buying Red Bull, 10 minutes before the car went missing. I wasn't. The jury exchanged glances, pencils scratching faster. Hensley scrambled. This is irrelevant. The defendant's prints. Aiden cut in, sharp as a blade. Print from touching a car I passed by. You've got no dash cam of me driving, no witness who saw me in it. Just a story you patched together because I'm an easy target. The room went quiet, the weight of his words sinking in. Tanya gripped the bench, her knuckles white. Clayton rubbed his temple, then turned to Hensley. Give me that bodega tape. Now. Hensley hesitated, his jaw tight. Your Honor, this is a fishing expedition. Clayton's voice hardened. You brought a video, counselor. He's got a right to poke holes. Move it. The clerk dashed out again, and the gallery buzzed louder. Reporters scribbling, a woman in the back whispering, he's good. Aiden stayed still, his mind racing. He'd planted the seed. Tyler Grayson, the rich kid who'd slipped through the cracks while he took the fall. It wasn't just about bad luck. It was about a system that saw his skin and stopped looking. His mom had warned him. They don't need proof when they've got prejudice. But he wasn't done digging. If that bodega tape showed Tyler, it'd crack the case wide open. If it didn't, Hensley would bury him. The judge's gavel tapped, cutting through the noise. We'll break again. I want that tape in my hands in 30. The room erupted. Hensley glaring, jurors murmuring, Tanya shooting Aiden a look that mixed pride and fear. He met her eyes, giving a small nod. The second twist was his, but the fight was far from over. Someone out there was laughing, thinking they'd gotten away. Not for long. The Cook County Courthouse crackled with tension as the second recess ended. The gallery was packed, spectators leaning forward, their whispers a low roar. Aiden Marshall stood at the defendant's table, his borrowed button-up slightly wrinkled now, but his resolve ironclad. His mother, Tanya, sat rigid in the front row, her eyes locked on him. Judge Edward Clayton took his seat, his face a mask of irritation and curiosity. Let's see that bodega tape, he said, his tone clipped. Victor Hensley rose, his suit still crisp but his confidence visibly shaken. Your Honor, the state has the interior footage from the bodega. It shows nothing conclusive, just the defendant loitering near the time of the theft. The projector hummed, casting a new image. Aiden at the counter, buying his soda, chatting with friends. No sign of Tyler Grayson. Hensley smirked faintly. See? He was there, steps from the car. Case closed. The jury shifted, some nodding, others frowning. Aiden's stomach dropped, but he didn't let it show. He'd gambled on that tape, and it hadn't paid off, yet. He stepped forward, voice steady. Your Honor, that proves I was inside, not stealing anything. Where's Tyler Grayson? He was there, I saw him. Why is he not on this tape? Hensley snapped. Because your story's a lie, kid. You're grasping at straws. Clayton raised a hand, silencing the prosecutor. You got more, Mr. Marshall? Aiden nodded, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. Yeah, this is a statement from the BMW's owner, Mr. Daniel Ortiz. He gave it to police the night of the theft, but it never made it to the prosecution's file. He held it up, reading aloud. I saw a white kid, maybe 16, jump into my car when I ran inside for smokes. Not the black kid you arrested. I'd know. A shockwave hit the room. The gallery gasped, reporters scribbling furiously. Hensley's face went pale. Your Honor, this is hearsay. Aiden cut in sharp. It's a witness statement you buried. Why? Because it didn't fit your narrative? Clayton's eyes narrowed, flicking to Hensley. Counselor, you know about this? Hensley stammered. It wasn't deemed credible. Ortiz is a felon. Aiden pounced. So you ignored him? Like you ignored the shadow in the video? Like Kendrick's fake report? He turned to the jury, his voice rising but controlled. They didn't want Ortiz's story because it points to someone else, someone they didn't want to touch. Tyler Grayson. The name landed like a grenade. The jury sat up straighter, eyes wide. Clayton rubbed his jaw, then barked. I want Officer Kendrick in here. Now. Minutes later, Kendrick shuffled in, stocky, red-faced, avoiding Aiden's gaze. Clayton didn't waste time. You wrote you saw the defendant in that car. GPS says you were at a diner. Explain. Kendrick shifted, sweating. I got the times mixed up, Your Honor. I saw him later, near the alley. Aiden jumped in. Later? After the car was ditched? You didn't see me drive anything. You picked me up because I was there, Black young, close enough. The gallery buzzed, a woman muttering, Jesus. Kendrick's mouth opened, then shut. Clayton pressed. Did you see another suspect? White kid, like Ortiz said. Kendrick hesitated, a beat too long. I didn't get a good look. The room exploded, whispers turning to shouts. Clayton slammed his gavel. Quiet. He glared at Kendrick, then Hensley. You built this case on sand, counselor. I'm starting to smell a cover-up. Hensley bristled. Your Honor, that's outrageous. But Aiden wasn't done. Call Tyler Grayson in. Ask him where he was. If he's clean, why's everyone dodging? The jury stared, riveted. Tanya's hands unclenched, a flicker of hope in her eyes. Clayton leaned back, exhaling hard. We're getting to the bottom of this. Subpoena Tyler Grayson. Today, the gavel cracked, and the room spun into chaos. Reporters bolting, Hensley slumping, Kendrick shrinking. Aiden stood tall, his pulse racing. The system was cracking, and he'd swung the hammer. Truth was close, but it wasn't as yet. ________________________ The Cook County Courthouse was a storm of anticipation as the final session began. The gallery overflowed, spectators crammed shoulder to shoulder, their murmurs a constant hum. Aiden Marshall stood at the defendant's table, his 17-year-old frame steady despite the sleepless night. His mother, Tanya, sat behind him, her eyes glistening with quiet pride. Judge Edward Clayton took the bench, his stern face etched with resolve. Bring in Tyler Grayson, he ordered, and the room held its breath. Tyler slouched in, 16, pale, blonde hair tousled, his designer jacket screaming privilege. His father, a slick lawyer named Richard Grayson, hovered nearby, whispering furiously to Victor Hensley. The prosecutor looked haggard, his suit rumpled, his confidence a distant memory. Clayton didn't waste time. Mr. Grayson, where were you the night that BMW was stolen? Tyler shrugged, smirking faintly. Home. Studying. Aiden stepped forward, voice calm but piercing. Then why'd I see you at the bodega, bragging about taking a joyride? Why'd Mr. Ortiz see a white kid jump in that car? Tyler's smirk faltered. Richard Grayson snapped. Objection, Your Honor. This is harassment. Clayton cut him off. He's not on trial yet. Answer, son. Tyler shifted, eyes darting. I don't know what he's talking about. Clayton turned to Hensley. You got anything to back this kid up? Hensley fumbled. We relied on the police report. Aiden pounced. The fake report from Kendrick? Or the video you cut? Call Ortiz in. Let him ID the thief. The gallery buzzed, heads nodding. Clayton nodded too. Get him. Minutes later, Daniel Ortiz shuffled in, rough around the edges but steady. He pointed at Tyler without hesitation. That's him. Saw him peel out in my car. The room erupted, gasps, shouts, cameras clicking. Tyler's face drained of color. Richard Grayson went rigid. Hensley slumped, defeated. Clayton slammed his gavel. Enough. Officer Kendrick, you're under review. Counselor, this case is a mess. Mr. Marshall. He paused, eyeing Aiden. Charges dismissed. A roar swept the courtroom. Cheers, applause, Tanya leaping up to hug Aiden. He hugged her back, exhaling years of tension. Clayton wasn't done. Tyler Grayson, you're detained pending investigation. And Hensley, I'm referring this to the DEA for misconduct. The gavel cracked, final and firm. Outside, the steps swarmed with reporters. Aiden, how'd you do it? What's next? He pulled his hoodie up, ignoring the mics, but paused for one. It's not about me. It's about the ones who don't get a shot. System's broken. Someone's got to fix it. Tanya smiled, arm around him. You scared me, kid. He grinned. Hatsuma. Across the street, Clayton watched from his car, his arrogance replaced by something like respect. He'd underestimated Aiden, assumed guilt like too many before him. Now, he'd remember. Aiden had forced the system to blink, and it wouldn't forget. The lesson hit hard. How many others have been railroaded by bias, buried by shortcuts? Aiden had fought with smarts and grit, but not everyone could. This one wasn't just his. It was a crack in the wall, a call to keep pushing. He'd be back, not as a defendant, but as a lawyer, tearing down the rot one case at a time. Justice had prevailed. The guilty faced consequences, and the fight, it was just beginning.